Thanks for coming back, everyone. This is Al from BluFo Innovations again. In this video, we're going to continue styling the rest of our page. Over the last couple of videos, we did a great job styling our header, but now we want to do the main and footer sections. And the pace of this video is going to be pretty fast. I'm going to try and style up this page pretty quickly. Don't feel compelled to do everything that I'm doing. And if you want, be creative. But I want to show you kind of some of the core concepts of using CSS and some common strategies when styling a page. So let's get started with our main section. Now, the first thing you may notice about our main class is that everything's pushed over to the left side of the screen. You have all of this empty negative space over here. And although that may work fine if you're viewing this website on a small screen like a cell phone, it's not going to work so great if you're viewing it on a large desktop screen like I am right now. It's going to look ugly and imbalanced. So let's try to fix that. And this is a perfect opportunity for me to introduce you to CSS classes. A class is basically a set of styles that you know you're going to use over and over again. So in our style.css file, let's create a class. And to do that, we're going to use a period and then the name of your class. I'm going to call mine container. And if you do much web development, you'll see containers like this pretty regularly. Basically, a container takes some elements and puts them in a, well, for lack of a better word, a container, and then centers that container in the center of the screen. I'll show you what I mean, but this container takes two parameters. The first one is max width, and I'm going to give that a value of 1200 pixels. So what that's going to do is it's going to set the container to grow with the page, grow, until it gets to 1200 pixels, and then it'll stop growing any wider. And then the second parameter is going to center the container in the middle of the page. And although there's a couple different ways to center elements, I'm going to just use this one, which is margin auto, and that should center my container. So I'll save that, and let's take a look at our page. Well, nothing changed. And the reason for that is because we haven't used our class yet. So to use a class, you have to go back into your HTML file, which I'll do, and then we need to apply that class to our main element. So our main element, I'm going to give it an attribute of class, and then it's the name of the class or classes you want to use. Mine was called container. And now if I save it again, you'll see that things are much closer to center. Now, our titles and our list aren't centered, but the container is, and that might seem a little bit confusing, but let me show you real quick what I mean. So if I go back into my style, I'm just going to real quickly say background color, and we'll give it the dark blue, sure. Save that and take another look, and you can see there's our container. So again, this container is 1200 pixels wide. If my screen was smaller than that, it would take up the full width of the screen. But once I get to 1200 pixels, it won't grow any wider. So my container is 1200 pixels wide, and it's centered in the middle of my screen. That's how a container works. And now I'll just go back and I'll remove this background color parameter. So the next thing is we have these three sections, right? But they're looking pretty boring at the moment, and they're also squished together a little bit. Let's try to work on those. And sections are just elements. So we can get the section element, and this will affect all three sections. And I want to put some space between them. So I'm going to say margin top, and we'll give that 50 pixels. That's going to put some space on the top of each one of those three sections. And then we'll do the same on the bottom, margin bottom, and give that 50 pixels of space as well. And then the last thing I want to do is just apply a line at the bottom of it. I want to put a border between them. And so I'm going to say border bottom. And borders take a couple different parameters, but I'm going to say 1 pixel solid. And then I'm going to use that BluFo blue again. And now if I save it and we take a look, there we go. It styled all three of those sections. It put space at the top, space at the bottom, and then it added this border as well. And this is a really good time for me to point out a specific difference when we're talking about positioning elements. A margin and padding are two parameters in CSS that add space around an element. The difference between them is that a margin adds space on the outside of the element, and padding adds space on the inside. So here you can see you have your list, then you have your border, and then you have your 50 pixels of space on the outside. That's because we use margin. But if I go back in here and I now add padding bottom, and we'll add another 50 pixels and save it, you'll see it adds space on the inside. So again, padding is going to be on the inside of your element. Margin is on the outside of your element. So I just did that real quickly to show you, but I am going to remove that padding. And that completes our section element. So the next thing I want to target is these headers here, these H3 elements. And these are the only H3 elements we have on the page. So I'm just going to say H3. And we're going to give these a couple different parameters. We're going to say color. And for now, I'll just give it that BluFo blue. We'll say font size. And you could put in a bunch of different values for font size. They have some default values here, which I actually will use. I'll say extra large, but you can also put in pixels or percentage and a whole bunch of other things. You can read about more of that in the documentation. And then the last thing I'm going to do is say text decoration, and I'm going to give these an underline. Remember earlier we removed an underline from our links, but here we'll actually give it an underline. And if I save that and take a look at it, there we go. That looks a little bit more robust. It stands out a little bit more, right? Now let's style these lists, which if you remember are made up of ordered list and list items. So let's target those list items. I'm going to go down and say LI color, and we'll give it that BluFo blue again. It did change the color, but these are very uninteresting right now. But I did that because I want to show you something that I think is interesting. And what I want to show you is that there's many different ways of selecting elements using CSS. And this is a little bit more of an advanced technique, but it's good to see some of the possibilities. So if I say LI colon nth child, and then between these parentheses, I'm going to put even. What this is going to do is select every even number of that element. So if I give this color, and I'll give it BluFo pink and save it, you'll see there it goes. It applied that style to every other element. So the first one is odd. The second one is even. Odd, even, odd, even. It looks great. Although I did just notice one issue, which is it applied that style to all of our list here, but it also applied that style to my list down here in the footer. And I don't want to do that. So again, let's go back and isolate it so it only affects the lists that are in my sections. So to do that, I'm just going to go here and I'm going to add section right before that line there, save it, and now it is only affecting these sections here. Pretty cool, right? And now I'll show you another way of targeting elements. Let's say we want to target just this middle section, this CSS section. How would we do that? Well, let's go back to our HTML page, and I'm going to show you something we did several videos ago. When we created these sections, we gave each of them a unique ID. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And IDs are really useful when we're doing CSS. So I'm going to go back to our CSS file and I'm going to target that CSS ID. To do that, I'm going to use a hashtag and then the name of the ID, which is CSS. And just to show you how this works, I'm going to give it a background color of that dark blue. Now, if we save it to take a look, there it is. It changed just the background on that element because that's the element with the CSS ID. Although I don't like the background color, so let's just change that. And instead, maybe we'll do this. We'll target the H3 element that's inside of that CSS element. So I'm going to say CSS H3, and we'll give this that pink color as well. And now if I save it, you'll see, again, it only changed the one inside that CSS element. Pretty cool again, right? So now what about our footer? Let's go change its color. And this is pretty simple by now. We know we just have to get our footer element, change the background color. Except this time, I don't want it to be exactly the same color as my header. I just want to make things a little bit more interesting. And what's really nice in VS Code is you can kind of hover over this color here and it gives you a color picker. So if you don't have a specific color in mind, you can come in here and just choose something. Let's say I want to make my footer just a little bit lighter color of blue, kind of a bluish gray color. I'll select that. And there we go. Just like that, we changed the color of our footer. It's not perfect, but since I'm kind of making things up as we go along here, I think that looks pretty good. But now we want to style these components that are inside our footer. Do you remember how we structured these in our HTML file? Well, this seems like an opportunity to introduce you to another tool that you have at your disposal, and that's the developer tools. So if you click in the menu of your web browser and search around a little bit, you should find something called developer tools. Go ahead and click on that, or you can use a shortcut. In my browser, the shortcut is Control, Shift, and I. So if I use that, it'll bring up this little window, and immediately you should see something that looks pretty familiar, especially here. This is your HTML. This is the HTML that you actually wrote. So we have our header element complete with our logo and navbar. We have our main element with our sections, and then we have our footer element. Or you can click on this button here, and what that allows you to do is click on any of the elements on the page, and it'll take you to that area of your HTML. So we know that we have a div here containing our navbar. We have another div containing our form, and then we have a third div which will eventually contain our social media icons. So we remember now that we had 3 divs that we wanted to arrange side by side with one another. So let's go ahead and do that. Like many things in web development, there's several different ways to achieve what we want. Let's try using a class first. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to create a new class, and we know that we have 3 divs we want positioned next to each other. So we're going to call these columns. I'm going to call my class column. Again, you use a period to start. And then we're going to give it a display property of inline block, which we know by now means it'll position the elements in line with each other. And the next property I want to give it is a width property of 33%. Anytime you're putting in a numerical value, you can use pixels, percentages, there's some other options, but I want it to be a third of the screen. So I gave it 33%. You'll have 3 columns, each taking up 33% of the width of the screen. And I'll go ahead to save that, but it's not going to do anything yet until we actually use this class. So let's go back into our HTML file and take a look at these divs. Here are our footer divs, and I want to apply that class to each of these 3 divs. So I'll show you another VS Code shortcut. I'm going to go into this div, then I'm going to hold down the Alt key and select the other 2 divs as well. And now whatever I type in there, it'll type into all 3 of those places. So let's give it a class attribute with the class column. And now if I save it, we can take a look at our page. And there we go. We have our 3 footer divs in line with each other, each taking up a third of the page. It still looks a little ugly at the moment, but that did accomplish what we wanted. But things look a little weird here because we don't really have a lot of content in this footer and everything's very spread out. So what I want to do is bring those elements in. And the way I'm going to do that is similar to something we've already seen before. I want to put those in a container. So I'm actually going to go into my footer and I'm going to create another div. And then I'm going to move these 3 div components inside of that div. And then I'm going to give this a class that we already created earlier, and that's our container class. And now if we take a look at it again, you can see we still have our 3 components in line with each other, but now it's brought them in, right? It's in the middle of the page. I think that looks a little bit better. Now I'm real quickly going to style up these components just to keep this video kind of short. Don't get too lost in the details here. I'm just trying to make things look good so we can move on to the next video where we'll look at something new. So I'm going to start with this little nav bar. And all I'm going to do is add some style to the links in my footer. So footer A, and I'm going to say color white, and then text decoration none. That's going to remove the underline. Great, then we'll style that form. So I'm going to get the label element, and I'm going to say display block. What that's going to do is put our label on its own line above the input. And then I'm going to say margin bottom 5 pixels. That'll put a little space in there. And then we're going to say color, and we'll make it pink. Okay, and then we're going to do something else we haven't done before. I'm going to apply the same styles to 2 different elements at one time. So my button element and the input element are both going to get this style. I use a comma there to apply the style to 2 different elements at one time. And we're going to say padding 10 pixels to just put a little extra breathing room in there. We're going to say border of dark blue. We'll say text color of dark blue. And then I'm going to use a border radius of 20 pixels. And I'll show you what that does. So if we look at our page, it makes these corners nice and rounded here. That's what the border radius does, is it adds this curvy radius to the corner of the element. So things look pretty good here, except our copyright element down here. That is not inside of our container. That's its own separate element. And so let's just center that. And to do that, we're going to give that div an ID. So I'm going to go into my HTML file, and here's that div. We'll give it an ID of copyright. And then if I go into my style sheet, to style an ID, we need to use a hashtag, remember, and that's copyright. And I'm going to give this a few different parameters. So it's going to get a text align center to put the text in the center of that div. Then we're also going to give it some padding of 20 pixels, again, to just let things breathe. We're going to give it a background color of our dark blue to actually just make it a little bit separate from the rest of our footer. And then we're going to give it a text color of white. And if I save that, we'll take a look. And there's our copyright div. It looks a lot better. So now we did a lot in this video. I know the pace was very fast and things still don't look perfect, but I want to move on to the next section. In the next section, we're going to make things even better. We're going to position some elements better. We're going to change these links here into our actual social media icons. And then we're going to take a look at some responsive styling, and I'll explain what that is in that next video.